Hi, this is a conversation with Bob Chitester, who is Chairman, President, and CEO of Free2Choose Network. Bob, I would like to take advantage of your experience in communicating ideas. In the last 20 to 30 years, how is it that communicating ideas has changed?
Well, a fundamental change is the fragmentation of the distributors. In the United States, when we did Free2Choose, there were only 4 networks. And the fourth of the networks, the public television one, was fairly small. Now today, you have hundreds of networks. And so you have this fragmentation so that from the point of view of those of us who have ideas we want to communicate, to get people to think about things, you have the difficulty of how do you capture an audience that's of significant size. And from our point of view, we've solved that by simply using a lot of different avenues to reach people.
And from the point of view of the audience, how has the audience changed, the public, the receptors?
That's a very difficult one because I don't want to characterize this incorrectly. But research clearly shows that in the United States anyway, those students who are in the 8th grade of a school, middle school in the United States, we call it 8th grade, and you look at some of the tests that they were taking 100 years ago, and there are tests that college students today would have difficulty answering. So that suggests there's been a degradation of the level of education. And yet I don't think that's an accurate way to describe it. I think it's that the audiences have changed in the sense that what they value, the things that they feel are important to know have changed. A liberal arts education, being widely read, et cetera, is no longer the central part of, say, a college education. So I think that has an impact. Among other things, I don't know if you know, but in the United States, if you do research on the millennials, they trust comedy news shows for their news more than they trust regular news shows. So there's been a dramatic change in that regard.
Is it possible to do a list of what makes a good communicator nowadays?
I think it's possible to generalize on what makes a good communicator anytime, period. And you have to have a knowledge of the subject matter that you're talking about. But you mostly have to have a connection. We use the word charisma, that an individual, in whatever medium they're in, I think it's essential that they, in addition to what the content is that they're trying to communicate, they have to communicate to the viewer, I know you're there, I'm interested in reaching you, and I like you.
You were close to Milton and Rose Friedman and had great experience with them in terms of communications also. What was Milton's strength in terms of communicating?
Well, his biggest strength was he's loved people. And when you love people, then that means those characteristics I was talking about are there automatically. That you get this feeling that, hey, gosh, this is somebody I'd like to sit down and talk to. He's telling me he's a friend. That's one of it. But the other aspect was Milton Friedman was a lifelong learner. And I mean that in the broadest sense. Of course, he would continue to advance his scholarship and his study in economics, etc. But he learned from every interaction with individuals. And he was open to that. So we throw him into an environment in which he's dealing with totally new things, clipboards that start and stop scenes, trying to say to him, can you do a 15-second statement here? And the point was, you either can rebel if you're thrown into that situation and say, well, I don't have to do that. Why are you putting these kinds of limits on me? Or you can simply say, wow, this is a whole new craft, a whole new way of communicating. And that's what Milton did. He just embraced it. And I think he described Free to Choose as the most exciting thing he and Rose did in their entire lives.
Was it?
I think so, yeah. And I think it was also extremely impactful when you consider the Free to Choose book is based on the Free to Choose TV series. We finished the TV series. Milton and Rose took the transcripts from the programs, went to their summer home in Vermont, and literally camped out for 6 weeks and turned it into a book. So as a result, the book is much more accessible. It's storytelling. There's a little bit of economics in there and economic theory, but it's mostly telling stories that illustrate those. And so I powerfully successful. The book sold 400,000 hardback copies the first year in the U.S. It sold 500,000 in the Japanese translation hardback. It's still available in print and has sold millions. And the TV show is still being purchased. We sell it online, and it's 30 years old, and people are still buying it. So I think it was quite successful.
You mentioned something. I was going to ask, what was Rose Friedman's role in Milton's ability to communicate? Did she have a role?
Yes. Her role was trustworthy consultant, meaning Milton had every reason to trust her judgment. They were very close. They'd built up, over the years, they'd built up a good understanding of each other, so that there were times when, working together, we would come to an agreement as to something Milton was going to do. Generally then, they would go away and privately discuss this. And Rose would kind of serve as a safety guard. Milton was enthusiastic and wanted to do things, etc. But she would then likely say, well, Milton, let's think about this. Do you really think you want to do that? And do you really think that's a good example of the point you want to make? So I think she played a very, very critical role as a sounding board. He could use her as a way to test out ways that you would communicate these ideas. And by that I mean the number of places that he went to visit in doing the TV series. In India, to go out into the countryside to visit a village where all you heard all day long were the clackety-clacks of the hand looms, and Milton using it to show how in India this had kind of frozen in time technological development. Whereas in the next scene we have is a jacquard loom in Japan whizzing away, and in probably three minutes turning out more cloth than this village would turn out in a week. And he would compare the two and say, well, this is because Japan opened itself up to free market capitalism and India did not.
I'm going to go to the list again. Is there a list of mistakes that a communicator should not commit?
In one sense, I would say no, because there's a chemistry about communicating. And I think there's a range of types of approach that can be successful. I think the one thing that I'd say is absolutely a killer is be yourself. If you're not yourself, that will ultimately show through. The viewer will ultimately see that you're putting on an act. I think to be an effective communicator, the viewer must believe that they're hearing you, the real you, and that you're not hiding anything or suggesting that you're just projecting these ideas as a performer rather than as a thinker.
You said viewers. What is your favorite media?
Oh, well, my favorite media is, I'll call it television, you call it film, call it video. In other words, to me, it's the totality of senses. You want to address as many different senses as you can. Well, video allows you to do that. You're addressing the visual sense, and that's why it's so important to have lighting correct and choose where you're doing things. It's why you want to have very, very interesting venues, places where you do. Go back to the Indian hand weaving in this Indian village, a very rich tapestry, a National Geographic kind of exploring of a culture. So you have the visual, and then you have the sound. So for example, radio is very good, but it doesn't have those other two elements to it. So I think I certainly prefer personally working in video. And yet, as a consumer, there it's hard to. In terms of intellectual exploration, a book is, to me, the place to go. You don't go to a TV show necessarily to get intellectual things. And yet, for entertainment, it's video, it's visual. And here's the trick. The trick is, we want to communicate ideas to the largest number of people. They will treat television as entertainment. If I present them with intellectual ideas without any storytelling, without any attempt to show them how do these ideas relate to your experience, if I don't show them that, they're not going to watch the TV program. They're going to say, hey, I didn't come here to be lectured. I came here to, I'm interested in learning something, but learning something like people learn when they go on a trip to Holland for a week. It's that kind of learning. It's this kind of relaxed learning, I'll say. I'll be kind.
In this same line, is it possible to explore now what is the future of communications? What is the trend? Where are we heading to?
Well, I guess I'd put, my answer to that would be, I don't think anybody can predict that. But I think there's going to be a characteristic, and there's going to be a shakeout of what I would call aggregators. The average individual does not have the time to every single day of their life totally sort out from the hundreds of sources which they want to watch. So I think it's interesting how the cable TV has evolved, because you had channels like the Discovery Channel or the Learning Channel or the History Channel for that matter that started out with a fairly narrow focus, so that if I tuned into the History Channel, I could pretty well expect that it's going to be something about history. If I tune into Discovery, it's going to be this intellectual excursion. Now I tune into Discovery, and what do I have? Ice road truckers or something. I have
aliens.
and why? Because each of those cable channels realized that if they were too narrow, their audience size was too low, so they could not financially survive. So I think the market has forced a homogenization of channels, so that every channel tends to look more and more the same, and yet they try to give you the feeling that they're different, but at heart they're as much alike as they can, because they want to attract as many viewers as possible.
And this takes me to another avenue. Has the financial area changed?
Oh, sure. But in one sense, it has not. As far as I know so far, you have three choices. You either operate, you can operate as a nonprofit, so people contribute to you. But in the general mass media market, you either have a subscription service where people pay for a year to watch. John Hendricks of Discovery has just started Curiosity Stream, and you pay, I don't know, $50 some a year, in order to have access to all of the documentaries that are going to be put on the Curiosity Stream. Or you do a channel where advertising is the source of revenue. And if you look at media broadly, it hasn't changed much at all, because advertising is still the overwhelming source of income for every media function I know of. They're all in the advertising business, except for the subscription ones. I mean, those are, so it's either a nonprofit where somebody else is paying for the whole thing and it's free to the viewer, or it's a subscription service, or it's advertising based. I think advertising based is one, and if you look back historically, that has been true throughout the history of media. Advertising has been the primary source.
Right. Finally, if a student approaches you and asks, would you recommend a book, would you recommend a website in order to understand communications in the 21st century, would you recommend something?
I'm hard-pressed to give you an answer, because it's not the kind of thing I would read. I think, I'm trying to think of things I've read recently. I'll give you a general answer. I think that in order to understand the evolution of media, or understand the media, pick a book that's a really good book. Read the book, the Steve Jobs biography, because it's going to give you a sense of what the combination is of entrepreneurism and technological development, how those two play together to result in change, either rapid, bang, bang, or incremental. And then you can apply it to any of these questions with regard to what if, because we can have a pretty good understanding of the process that's going to lead to what's going to happen 10 years from now. What we can't do is really guess very accurately as to what's that process going to end up with. You know, is the iPhone 10 going to really be something sensationally new and different? I don't know. We're going to find out pretty soon in that case.
Bob, thank you very much for sharing these experiences with us, and thank you too.